All right, I believe that we are live. Give me 1 second just so that I can double check that. Make sure that I have sound on myself. All right. Apologies for the late start on this. As you can see, at the moment I am alone, but we will have some people joining us in a bit. I just want to make sure that everything is up and working and that we get some housekeeping out of the way for anybody that's listening out there. Give me 1 second. Man. Okay, good. I can hear myself. Fantastic. All right. So, hello, everybody, and welcome to our February listening club. We have a really iconic one today. It's been suggested multiple times. It's actually my mom's favorite album. So, shout out to her for getting us to listen to this one. So, tonight we are listening, but we also have a movie club as well as a book club. Our movie club actually met just this past Monday, and that is going to be up. You can still watch it, you can still respond to it. We also have a book club, but that actually is not meeting until the end of April. Yeah, the end of April. Uh, so we're reading The Night Circus. For anybody that's watching us live, if you do decide to join in on the conversation, you can just send a comment over and we will actually see that live and you'll be able to join the discussion. If you're watching it on the replay or if you're watching our movie club that already happened, you can still respond to it. We still get those notifications and we still want to discuss the media with you. If you'd like to suggest something, or if you'd like to if you'd like to suggest something, or if you would like to join on any of our future calls, you can absolutely join us over in our Facebook group, which I have provided on the screen here. We also have a Patreon because we don't just do these clubs here at Dragonfly Arts. We also do live meetups, we have feedback calls, we have um, tons of things going on. And in the future, we're planning on having a lot more things going on. And if you want to support us, you can absolutely do that over at our Patreon for as little as $2 a month. I apologize. My brain is all over the place. I can see my guests are coming in. And so I'm just trying to navigate multiple things. I am a little bit all over the place, but that's going to be okay. So you can join us there and stay up to date on any of the happenings that are going on. But for tonight, talking about Fleetwood Mac, Rumors. Hi, Tim.
Where's everybody?
I don't know. They must have gotten the dates wrong because, it's a leap year.
I sent a message to Miguel, saying how much I wanted him to be here because I wanted to hear his thoughts on this album.
It's actually was also suggested by Beckett, and I sent her a message. So I was telling everybody as I was getting all the housekeeping out of the way that we'll likely have more people joining us as it goes on. Um, this is an iconic album. I don't have to ask my first question, which is, have you heard this album before?
Never. I don't even know this band. Never heard of them.
Did you re-listen to it before the club?
Oh, I've been listening to it. I've been listening to it a couple times a week since we announced it. Just to, I had to. It's funny because I was going to send you a message that suggest we do both this and the White Album before it because
Yeah.
so I have always thought of them as a piece, and I really forget which songs are on which. Um, I don't anymore because I've always, again, as I said, I've always thought of these as a piece, and I always had a hard time telling them apart. But listening to them again over the last couple of weeks, I realized while the songwriting is very consistent um, across the albums, what changed on this album is the production took a step up. And we can talk about why that is in the main conversation. But I still, this from the songwriting perspective, I still think of these albums as things that kind of happened at the same time, um, and very different from Tusk, which was the next and last studio album. Because I don't, this is as far as I'm concerned, this run of Fleetwood Mac is the end of Fleetwood Mac. Um, and Tusk is a very different album from the first two of this Mark III version of Fleetwood Mac.
I kind of wish that I took the albums, like the album cover of Fleetwood Mac by Fleetwood Mac, um, because even the like, it's so weird looking at the covers, and both the Fleetwood Mac album and Rumors have like the same vibe for their covers, and then just like Tusk is just so different, and so is sorry, I have to go look it up because I don't even know it. Heroes Are Hard to Find.
Oh, well, yeah, but that's a different band.
That's an entirely different band, but it's also just like interesting that like looking at those two are just
Yeah.
the same thing. I also we picked this album, I was like, "Oh, I like these songs." And I was like, "Wait 1 second," cuz I also do that. Confuse the two of them. They were released 2 years apart, and I think even when I posted the thing, I was like, "Maybe listen to, you know, Fleetwood
Yeah.
Mac's."
What's what I realized today, listening to both albums again, is that this album, it feels like the White Album was done to a click track. All those songs sound very stiff to me. This album sounds like they sounded live. The um, the White Album is almost a soft rock album, and it's very consistent in sound across the board. This is a rock album. Um, the and I think from what I understand, that has a lot to do with what happened producer wise. Lindsey Buckingham moves into a higher position in the production pecking order during this album, and it there's definitely there's the way the rhythm section is mixed is much more forward on this album, and that makes it feel like not a hard rock album, but this is not soft rock, whereas the White Album feels like a soft rock album.
It's funny because what you just said is like almost not word for word, but is exactly what Wikipedia says, the exact line that I like pulled up from the Wikipedia about like the producer of Fleetwood and McVie chose to dispense with the services of their previous producer because he favored a lower emphasis on the rhythm section.
Oh, okay, well, there you go.
Um, like it's very specific in why they got rid of him. Um, yeah, this album it's a different beast. It is crazy from start to finish, but I also think a reason why it has a lot looser of a feel is because they had a lot more money and had a lot more free reign, and also didn't want to talk to each other, and so I imagine that they were a lot looser in their actual like production style and paying attention to, and it still works so well. It's just looser.
Yeah, I think some of that is because the White Album is their first album with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, so
Mhm.
they're coming to this long established band. Christine McVie and John
Uh,
and Mick had all been working together, for 6 years. Well, John and Mick had been working together for 10, 15 years at that point. Um, and Christine became a full-time member of the band in 72, I think. And but this is, this is all new for Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. So I think they were getting comfortable, and they kind of went in there and did what they could with what they had. Whereas this album was followed by a massive tour, and you can hear the difference live. Fleetwood Mac during this time always sounded better live than they did in the studio. They loosened up, and Lindsey Buckingham was far more aggressive a player. Mick Fleetwood and John McVie were very aggressive live, something that was tamed in the first studio album, but was kind of let loose during this album.
Right. I have to ask my other standard question before
Mm.
we really get into things, and then a secondary question for Fleetwood Mac. But what is your favorite song on this album?
That's I've been thinking about that a lot because I knew that question would come up. You know, if you hold a gun to my head, it would be hard to choose between two very different songs. I think as a rock and roll tune, The Chain is the best tune on here. Um, that's the one that leaves the biggest impression, but also one of my probably my yeah, actually my favorite Christine McVie tune, the one that I posted when she passed, is Songbird. The most beautiful thing anybody in that band has ever written. It's giving me chills right now talking about it, and I cried when I put this on listening to it after she died, and I cried.
Yeah. Christine McVie is my favorite songwriter from their group in the sense of whenever I hear one of her songs, I want to play it myself.
Hmm.
And Songbird is by far my favorite song by them, and a part of that is because the first time I, like, heard it and, like, consciously thought about it, it was actually the Eva Cassidy cover of it.
Hmm.
But, like, whenever I hear her songwriting, it's like I want to play those songs. Like, I like those
Hmm.
songs, whereas I find everybody else works really, really well for the band.
Hmm.
But
Yeah,
her songs are just like they're really solid songs that can be brought to other artists as well. And I feel like
I
you
will.
can't say that for most of the other.
Well, you certainly can't say it for Stevie Nicks'
No.
song. I don't think anybody could do those songs, and some of them I would question why anybody would want to, but that's a whole other thing. I think Christine McVie is a far more interesting songwriter than Stevie Nicks, who tends to get contrived. On the other hand, not her best song, but one of her. If I never hear Dreams or Rhiannon again, it won't be too late. Because I grew up and I heard those. I don't know. But okay. That being said, Gold Dust Woman is not my favorite Stevie Nicks tune, but I think it is one of her better tunes. For me, her best tune is Landslide. It's a fantastic lyric. It has none of the trappings of Stevie Nicks with the and I'm a witch and whatever that bullshit was all about. It doesn't. It's just a good solid song, and I think Fireflies is also another example of that. Goldust Woman almost gets there. It's got some of the Stevie Nicks silliness, particularly during the fade out, when she's got nothing to do, so she starts randomly free associating words. Um, but yeah, so um, yeah, that's my Stevie Nicks rant for the evening.
No, we're on the same page with like our enjoyment of Fleetwood Mac and our thoughts on songwriters. Um and songs, because The Chain is by far my favorite song. I don't think it matters how many times I listen to it. I always jam out,
Hmm.
especially like towards the end of it.
Oh, it's such a great, and you can hear everybody. You can hear all the instruments. John McVie's bass is out front.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
and I
also,
think
I
you can
think,
even,
their only song that they like have everybody listed as like a writer on.
well, my understanding is this was pieced together from material that they all had over the years, and that's so amazing because it feels like one thing, which is that's an incredible piece of songwriting that people were okay, let's take this, put this here, and let's do this here, and yet it feels like one thing.
Yeah, it's Yeah, it is definitely all of them put together, especially for a band that kind of just all writes their own music, and
Hmm.
then they they all bring themselves into like that. But you know exactly, like, everybody has their own vibe as they're writing. Songbird is actually hilarious when I listen to it, because I realized when I was listening to this album that I must have been listening to it on the background, because I never I know all these songs. I hear them all the time. But, like, in order, Songbird is just jarring between Go Your Own Way and The Chain.
Yeah.
It's just like, "All right, and now time for a slow, soulful ballad in the
But
middle."
remember, this was originally released on vinyl, so
Yeah,
Songbird closed out side one, so people wouldn't automatically move into the chain. It was a good way to end,
ended. Yeah.
because it's such a an unusual tune tonally compared to the rest of the tunes. It that's probably the best place to put it. If you had put it in the middle of side one or anywhere on side two, except maybe again on as the last tune, um, it it doesn't work as well. But then looking at what's here, you have Oh Daddy, and Goldust Woman closing out the. So if you throw Songbird in there, that was probably too many ballads to put in a row. So
Yeah.
programming wise, this is the. I mean, I'm looking at all these, and I think if it wasn't a single, it was a tune that AOR radio stations were playing. Every single tune on here, except I Don't Want to Know and Oh Daddy. I think those are the only tunes that didn't get significant radio play on album-oriented rock stations. Every other song on here got played, and Dreams was a single, Don't Stop was a single, Go Your Own Way was a single, and You Make Love and Fun was a single. I'm pretty sure.
Interestingly, yes, you are correct. But interestingly, Oh Daddy was a single in Japan,
Hmm.
which was just like one of those things, because it's one of those things that I always come across, because we always end up talking about like what were the singles on the album. So now, like, I go and look it up. We've never actually talked about. I think about it a lot when we do these talks, but of Japanese releases,
Hmm.
because it's an entirely different game. And when I was younger and I lived in Europe, we actually got a lot of the Japanese releases,
Yeah.
because there were such high tariffs on them that they actually had to do all of them as bonus albums. And that's where like deluxes and bonus albums come from, is because they
Yeah.
had to find a reason for it.
so
But this
many
was,
bands so many bands that I grew up with in that time had albums that at the time were only released in Japan, or were supposed to only. Deep Purple's Made in Japan was only supposed to get released in Japan. The band was very serious about not wanting it released in America, and then I guess somebody here got a hold of a few tracks, put it on the radio, and the next thing you knew, it got released in the States, and it's their biggest selling album next to Machine Head. Santana, they had a live album called Lotus that was recorded at Budokan, I think, and it was CBS for whatever reason refused to release it in the United States, and it didn't get a United States release until I think 90 or something, and of course everybody bought it. It's the Santana band during their fusion period in the mid 70s. So yeah, Japan, it's amazing what they were getting back in the day. Now, oh, and there was the Miles Davis albums. The
oh, a
uh,
lot of Blue Note actually.
well, this
But
wasn't actually Blue Note. This is when
yeah.
he was on CBS. He was doing. Miles was very rarely going in the studio to record at that point. The vast majority of albums that were getting put out were Japanese live Japanese shows in Japan, and Carnegie Hall. And I don't think Agartha and what was the other one? Agartha and I can't remember the other title, but I don't think those got stateside releases till much later than they were released in Japan.
Yeah. Man,
So let's talk
Japan,
about
they had it so much better.
yeah, but
But because
you
they
know, and
cost more, so they made more
Japan
money.
Japan has a lot greater respect, or had a lot greater respect, for American artists, particularly American artists that were outside the norm, particularly jazz artists. There was during the 70s and 80s, jazz artists could not make a living in the United States, but they could go to Japan and clean up. A lot of them moved out there for a while because they were doing so well. Kind of the way they moved to France, during the 50s. In the late 40s, because after the war, the black jazz artists, the only place they got any respect was in Europe. Um, yeah,
I don't
USA,
want to, yeah, I don't want to get too off topic for it, but
right? Absolutely.
that's why we suggested Japanese pop music to you, because Japanese pop music is if pop music had a higher jazz influence.
Yeah.
They
Can we
are
talk
they're
about Oh Daddy?
sure.
Let's talk about Oh Daddy. So I had a huge issue with this tune. I just hated that fucking lyric. It was so, it was so not feminist. It was so it was, I didn't view it as a portrait. I viewed it as, I guess, as advocating, the superiority of men. And it's only recently that I came to recognize it as this very tragic portrait of a woman who's been beaten down, who's probably been abused. I don't know if that's what Christine McVie's intent was, but it's still a hard lyric for me to listen to because it's got that awfulness attached to it. But I've over the past couple of years, I've come around to it and recognized it for it as a character piece, more than an advocacy or just or whatever it was, however it was that I was thinking about it.
I'm I'm trying to read up on it because I'm like I don't know the background on the song either, but it is a clickable link. So I can click on that and find out.
Right. I don't think there's anything. I think the only thing they give you there is that it's about Mick Fleetwood's wife at the time because they
Yeah.
were breaking up at that point.
Yeah. Um that is exactly what it says. You've read the same Wikipedia post as me.
Yeah, but I wanted to see what if Christine McVie ever talked about the lyric, and I've never been able to find anything about that lyric, and it's an incredibly sad and depressing. It would make me angry. I would turn it off. It was the one song on this despite my never needing to hear Dreams ever again. I wouldn't skip over it when I played the album, but when Oh Daddy came on, it was like, nope, jump.
um I never had that. It didn't have that effect on me, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah.
Um but also, I mean, this album was released in 1977.
Hmm.
Um I wasn't born until 1990. So
Hmm.
in my head, sometimes I hear things like that and I'm just like,
Yeah.
different time frame. And I can just like pass over phrasing.
Yeah. I mean, I had what? I had 13 more years to listen to this album than you did.
Yeah. Um, well, if it makes you feel any better, I missed out on like all of the really good concerts.
Yeah. I missed out on some of them, but
um, yeah, I wish Beckett was here for this one. This was her
I
pick.
do too.
Um, because I can talk we can talk about just the craziness that is what was going on, and I have nothing but respect for everyone in this band for
Oh
like
yeah.
be going through like the worst things, a lot of them just with each other. Just
Hmm.
yeah, everybody breaking up. There were so many divorces happening. Nobody was having a good time.
I think one of the interesting things about it is everybody thinks of this album as the one where, and it was probably very bad at this point, but they were
Yeah.
still able to work together. But actually, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham were already breaking up when they joined the band. they were kind of jumping back and forth, but they were already breaking up. And I think John McVie and Christine were not doing well either. I don't know anything about Mick Fleetwood's marriage at all. But probably because his wife wasn't a member of the band, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a few of the songs on the White Album reference, are come from some of that turmoil that was going on in people's lives at the time.
I actually think Mick Fleetwood was going through the worst time for Rumors because he was also going through a divorce at the time because his
Yeah,
wife had cheated on him. Yeah.
right.
But everybody else was kind of on again, off again. Um, and I think mostly the reason why they were probably able to come together, and this is me just spitballing here. Um,
Mhm.
I mean the album's called Rumors. It's called Rumors
Yeah.
for a reason. And I think that they at least could have, their own some sort of solidarity in the fact that no matter what was going on in their personal lives, at least it wasn't whatever it was that media was telling
Yeah.
everybody.
I mean, at the risk of sounding completely sexist, and I swear that sexism has nothing to do with it. Um, for all her talents, I'm talking about Stevie Nicks. Lindsey Buckingham did shit with her tunes that really, really, and this is not to, cut her in terms of her lyrical work or her musicianship. I'm sure she had a part to play in the writing of the musical arrangement, but Lindsey Buckingham was the perfect producer for her. He knew how to make those sounds um, into these things that worked really well. He's a great producer and he's a great writer, and he brings things to her tunes as a musician that I don't think would be there. Um, I know that Lindsay and Christine McVie were very close and they loved writing songs together, but I think Christine is a far more complete musician on her own. I think Christine McVie could produce a finished song, music and lyrics, whereas I don't think Stevie Nicks could bring that kind of. There's no evidence that I've seen in terms of production that she could bring a polished final work in without the help of somebody, a really good producer, whereas Christine McVie can
I don't know.
or could.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I was like, I don't because Christine McVie is also like their keyboard player. So she probably composed all of her songs and I can 100% hear it, and it's also probably why I find them all to be like very arrangeable, I guess.
Mhm.
Is because she is a pianist and
Well, so is Stevie Nicks, and
yes.
Stevie Nicks plays piano and guitar as well. I think I don't know. Anything that I would say would just be me spitballing what it could be. I just think that writing lyrics was more her priority.
I always imagined like Christine McVie writing a song at a piano, and I
Mhm.
imagine Stevie Nicks just belting it out somewhere.
Yeah,
Like,
could be. Yeah.
these are
During
all just rumors though. So
right. I don't know much about either their. Well, I know a little bit more about Stevie Nicks because she was very local for the most. She's Southern California when she started writing, but I think her and Lindsey Buckingham had been partners for a number of years and already had an album out, and I just think they. Uh, I think that's I, and this again will sound sexist. I honestly don't know if she would have had the career she had if she had not met him first. Um, and there's a story that I've heard it repeated a number of times that Mick and John did not want Stevie Nicks when they wanted Lindsey Buckingham, And Buckingham said they were a package deal, and that's how she wound up in Fleetwood Mac. That's not dismissing, and I'm not dismissing her talent as a singer, but she might have been one of those people that never got noticed. There's lots of talented singers and songwriters out there who never really get noticed. And what would have happened to her if Lindsey Buckingham had said, "Okay, fine, yeah, I'll go. Sorry, honey, they don't want you."
Yeah, I don't think that's sexist at all, especially considering, especially in songwriting, because I am convinced that like the best songwriter is just somewhere so buried under a bunch of like muck and stuff that we'll never hear them,
Mhm.
unfortunately, because it's not about like any sort of skill set. It's just who you know.
Mhm.
Because who knows? Maybe Lindsay Buckingham could have left her and then she could have dated somebody else who brought her into some other deal.
Yeah.
All of it is pure luck, but we as the audience then actually get to hear her music.
Mhm. I Yeah, I mean, I think I think Mick and John were very accustomed to thinking themselves um, as I guess as a rock band. I was going to say, but it's interesting. I talked about the production of the White Album and how much different this album is, but in fact, the way that first album with these two was produced, it sounds very consistent with the work they were doing with Bob Welch in Fleetwood Mac Mark II, um, which Bob Welch is a very different songwriter as well, as different a songwriter as Lindsey Buckingham is different. They both write pop tunes, but they have both very radically different ways of thinking about pop. And that's one of the things that's great about here. The two best songwriters, who I think are Lindsey Buckingham and Christine McVie, they both write pop tunes, but neither of them write anything like each other. Nothing that Lindsey Buckingham writes is going to sound like anything Christine McVie writes, and neither of them would write anything that would sound like something that Bob Welch would write
It,
back in the day.
it's so
Very
ins-
different perspectives on pop.
yeah, it's not to continue going back to it, but it's so insane to me that like all of the songs are just like written by one of them and then arranged, I guess, for the group at large, and they still feel coherent together and yet so
Yeah.
distinct from each other. It's very impressive.
Um, Yeah, and not to harp on Lindsey Buckingham, but he was already Stevie Nicks' songwriting partner, and then he felt an affinity in terms of songwriting with Christine McVie as well. So I think that's where the consistency comes in terms of songwriting. The same pop ear was putting his spin on their stuff. Um, yeah. Um, I've always thought the fawning over him during the Tusk sessions was a little overdone. It was, oh my God, Lindsay saved us. It was all bullshit, but that was the kind of way it was promoted. It was made to look like Lindsey Buckingham was the sole genius, that made everything about Tusk work, which
Hmm.
if you want to go down that road, then you can also hold them responsible for the weaknesses of Tusk, which probably didn't need to be a two-record set.
I will fully admit that I don't know Tusk as well as I know the other two albums. So I will defer to you on this
It's
one.
worth a listen.
Yeah.
It's a classic album, and it is part of, it's interesting because it's such a radical departure from this album.
There was something I was going to bring up here. Oh, all of its peak positions. It's weird that it was not a good album in France.
Why?
I don't know. I know that this is like really small, but it's another thing that we always end up talking about at some point. And so,
116 peak position?
mhm.
Wow.
and
Because look at
everything
where it is
else is
everywhere.
like, yeah, one like I don't know why Hungarian albums is on there, but it's like 20, surprisingly 30 in Japan. Um, Belgium also not huge
Oh,
fans of
look at the
singing
split in
U2.
Belgian albums. I don't know what the difference between, well, Flanders is a city, so I'm assuming Wallonia is a city as
Yeah,
well.
Waloya.
Um,
Um,
so so
I have a
Wallonia doesn't care for Fleetwood Mac apparently, but
I
Flanders
have a
does.
theory here. So, yes. All right. So, Wallonia is the part of Belgium that borders France.
Well, there you go. That explains it.
So,
But
yeah,
look
I
at all
don't
those
know
number ones.
why. I'm genuinely curious now why French people hate Fleetwood Mac.
Well, we would have to see how their other albums performed.
Um, don't even have records of it for
Yeah.
Tusk because I already had that one up. Um, this is not where I saw this conversation going, but
No.
I have questions.
Well, they're a they're a rock slash pop band, during the era that rock bands were pop bands, but they were probably the biggest band in the world at this particular time, at this moment in time.
Yeah. Um, this is my mom's favorite album of
Mm,
all time. Um, so for Fleetwood Mac, um, it doesn't show French sales, but for the charts for the album, it still was around 20 for everything. And then Wallonia's at 157. So, yeah,
yeah, I can't explain it,
I can't explain it. It's just really interesting.
but in terms of craft, and I'm not gonna sit here and compare to the Beatles, because
Please do. We still have
down
like 20 minutes, so.
down that road, lots of flame throwing lies. Um, but and a good friend of mine, a good friend of mine hates Fleetwood Mac, and it's so interesting because I know how much he loves pop, and I know he loves good pop. He does not like bad pop. He loved the first Chicago album, but then he heard the second album and he was like, "Yeah, I'm done with this band." Um, so, and I listened particularly to Lindsey Buckingham's tunes, and I think there's a craftsmanship there that is so high level. Um, I think Christine McVie just doesn't really think about craft. I think it just comes out of her naturally. Whereas Lindsey Buckingham is very analytical and and you're like, okay, I can do this here, but if I do this here, I imagine he's I've heard that he can be difficult to work with because he's very demanding and very precise in exactly what he wants. Whereas I think craft for Christine McVie is far more effortless. She's like, da, 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 oh, yeah, that's good. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah, take it, go. It's done. And Lindsay's still going, yeah, can we push track 4 back a half a second? Yeah.
And then you have Stevie Nicks, where we both imagine that she just kind of sings things out loud and then somebody else fills in
Yeah.
everything else.
Let me see what flowery, cool, pretentious words I can put into this song because I'm a
Look,
witch.
look, I went to music school. I had to take songwriting classes. That is 100% what you do.
I I mean, I was one of the millions of boys who had a huge crush on her. She was the cutest thing we'd ever seen. Um, and part of my bias is that I was there, and God, Dreams and Rhiannon, and it was just jammed down our throats. Not her fault, but it was. You could not put on the fucking radio without hearing those two fucking tunes. And just it soured me on the Stevie Nicks experience.
I mean, she was an icon. She was a pop star.
Hmm.
Like everything from like the witchy vibes. You know as soon as you see somebody whether or not they were influenced by Stevie Nicks
Oh yeah.
on today's music. She definitely was like the face of the band. Those songs still get like they're still incredibly popular. I've spent my entire life listening to them.
Yeah.
And yet the first time I heard Songbird was somebody else covering it.
Hmm.
So, um
Yeah.
yeah,
Far be
yeah,
it.
I 100% understand that.
Yeah. I don't. I've long accepted that I don't listen to music the same way that most people do, and that mediocre pop tunes that most Americans, if nobody else, seem to love leave me like, yeah, I don't, get it. Um,
You need to watch a Eurovision.
why?
Because just the phrase of like, well, at least Americans don't get it. I'm like, but have you seen Eurovision?
Yeah, no, I know. That's kind of, um, yeah, my anti-Americanism is showing. Uh, I know that kitschy stuff does well in other countries as well, or stuff that I would call kitschy. Um, yeah, I don't know. I, I don't know. I hold America's taste in art to be much lower than what it is in the rest of the world. Generally speaking, I know that doesn't hold across the board consistently, but I think generally speaking, um, Americans like their entertainment easy, and they want it to go down. It's why Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, when you ask people they like jazz, they say, yeah, Kind of Blue is my favorite album. I'm like, you haven't listened to much jazz then. I mean, it's a good album. It's an important album. It's a landmark album, but it's definitely not Miles' best. But everybody's like, oh, no, this is Miles' greatest work. I'm like, no, it's not even close.
I think that goes for a lot of things. In general, people do want entertainment to be the easiest form of entertainment possible. To go back to the Stevie Nicks thing, she's very, very easy to latch onto.
Yeah,
So that's kind of her.
particularly if you're a woman.
Yeah, particularly if you were a woman in 1970s.
Yeah, yeah.
So, um, my mom would have been 16.
So your mom's my age.
Yeah, she would have been 16 when this album comes out. So I 100% could see her at 16 seeing Stevie Nicks and being like, yes,
Yeah,
that is my persona now.
yeah. And I totally get that. I totally understand that, and I, you know, but it also makes her somebody who you can't criticize without being called, a misogynist, which
Yeah.
is why I've always kind of stayed away from this conversation in other contexts. My feelings for her have nothing to do with the fact that she's a woman. It's, it's what I hear in the craft.
Um, I never asked my second question because it is Fleetwood Mac because you answered it in your discussion, which was who is your favorite songwriter from Fleetwood Mac?
Oh, there are three principal songwriters, and I love two of them.
It's fair enough.
We were talking about favorite songs, and what I thought I was going to do is not pick a favorite single tune, but a favorite tune from each songwriter, which,
Oh, so
you
you
know,
never did your Stevie Nicks, which I guess you did with Gold Dust
I
Woman.
did. On this tune, "Gold Dust Woman," I don't think it's her best song, but on this album, I think it's her best song.
Yeah.
Um,
But you didn't do anyone that was straight Lindsey Buckingham.
oh well, that would be um,
It's up on the screen.
never going back again.
All
Which
right.
Lindsay did not play. The way he does it on here is very different from the way he played it live. And you should check out the Fleetwood Mac live album to see how he does that, because it's a very bouncy tune. It's a very sad lyric, but to a bouncy tune. And when he would play it live, he would go dark with it. He would make it sound like, the music would sound like the lyric does.
I will definitely have to check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Secondhand News is a great tune, but I think Never Going Back Again is one of the most powerful things that he's written. Um, the other tunes are, Go Your Own Way, standard pop tune, great pop craftsmanship. You Make Love and Fun, But yeah, so the three principal songwriters, I would go with Never Going Back Again, and Songbird, of course, and Gold Dust Woman. And then, just for shits and giggles, let me find my Wikipedia page and jump over to the previous album. Here we go, Fleetwood Mac, also known as the White Album. And the only reason I ever called it that was because Christine McVie referred to it that way. She would introduce tunes and she would say the White Fleetwood Mac Album. And that was when I started calling it the White Album.
I mean, it makes sense. That is, in fact, what it is.
Well, they already had the very first Fleetwood Mac album in 1968 was called Fleetwood Mac. so, um, on this one, this is, if I on so on the first one, to pick my favorites, definitely "I'm So Afraid," another one that Buckingham would take very dark, when he played it live. But it's very, as I said, this album is very stiff. Probably played to a click track, but "I'm So Afraid" really works. Stevie Nicks' best tune, "Landslide," is on here, and Christine McVie's probably, uh, "Over My Head," which is probably the rare instance of me picking a single, one that was released as a single, as my favorite tune.
That's fair.
And then Tusk, there's just, so many. There's so much to choose from. It's a wealth of riches and shit. Um, let's see, Tusk. Um, There's a beautiful Stevie Nicks or a beautiful Christine McVie tune that opens it up. Not many rock bands would open with a ballad, and Tusk opens with "Over and Over." Oh, and then one of the most other annoying Stevie Nicks tunes is "Sarah." Ryan and Sarah and Dreams. Put a bullet in my head. Um, so Christine McVie's "Over and Over." Um, Probably Buckingham's "Not That Funny," and nothing from Stevie Nicks that I care for on this one. Although "Tusk" is a very impressive piece of work, although I have no idea what that song means. You should check out the live album just for the performances, because it kind of takes all the best material from the three albums, and you get to hear them just do it the way they did it live, because they're always a much better live band than they were in the studio.
Yeah, I definitely want to. It was one of those things where when we started listening to this, I realized that a lot of my knowledge of Fleetwood Mac is just contained within pop culture almost.
Sure.
Like, yeah, they're icons and it got passed down that way. So like I knew this album, I knew the White Album, and then like it got to Tusks and I was like, I don't know this album. I know some of the songs on it, but like I don't know it. And I wanted to like go through that as well as like some of their live performances, and unfortunately I just worked too much this month.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tusk,
Uh,
the biggest hit was this was the biggest hit was of course the Stevie Nicks tune Sarah. Um, I don't know if Over
oh,
and Over was
interesting.
released as a single. Tusk was released as a single, but it's a very odd tune. I think they released it just so they could do the video, which they did with the USC marching band.
I got distracted because I saw that on the Tusk tour they used an Oberheim synthesizer.
Oh, okay.
So I got distracted because I was like, synthesizer?
Wait a minute.
I know what those are.
Who played it?
Um, the keyboard tech to cover some of the horn parts that they used.
Oh,
So instead of bringing horns along, they used a synth.
well, oh, yeah, on the tour. Yeah, they would
Yeah,
have. Yeah.
on the tour.
Like the USC marching band actually did the recording and then they
Yes.
did the video as well. It's a fun video. But again, it's one of Lindsey Buckingham's weird lyrics. I have no idea what it's about. It's it has a darkness to it, but it's I don't know, it's a very odd tune and I love it. I have no idea what it means and it's kind of like Elton John's Take Me to the Pilot. Elton John and Bernie Taupin's Take Me to the Pilot. The lyrics mean just silliness. Bernie Taupin said he heard that David Bowie would throw a bunch of words into a hat and then randomly take them out, and that was how he made the song. And he wanted to try that, and that's how he did "Take Me to the Pilot," which is one of Elton John's best songs.
Maybe we should try that.
What,
We
writing a
should,
song like that?
yeah.
I'll do that.
All right.
That's
So
like, oh, we out of time?
we're getting close to it.
God, I feel like I talk too much. Becca, say, or Becca, Rebecca, bleh, say something.
Something.
Tell me about your favorite Fleetwood Mac tunes.
I mean, I already said I have a very strong love for Songbird. It
Yeah.
plays in my head randomly in the middle of
What
the
is it?
day.
What is it about that tune that I thought I was the only one that noticed the tune? And when she passed away, even Rick Beato went to Songbird. He's like, you have to listen to this, to see how wonderful, Christine McVie was. And he goes to Songbird. And I thought I was the only one that it affected that way, but apparently it has something that gets to everybody.
It's a good song. It is a
Mhm.
fantastic song. That being said, listening to it on this album it's not the strongest tune on this album for them.
Oh,
For
uh,
them.
okay.
Um Simply because when I think of Fleetwood Mac, I think of like the arrangement. It is like it's a weird step aside from what the rest of the album sounds like, which
Mhm.
is both very lovely and very calming, but it doesn't I feel like I get very revved up while listening to this album and then Songbird comes on and I calm down a little bit and then I get revved up again. Does any of that make sense?
Not for me because I'm so accustomed to listening to, and that was a thing during the 70s, and that's was that, we didn't those of us who love music, we listened to whole albums. We didn't just listen to singles. And the other problem with singles is that they were usually cut down. Most of the tunes that the great artists were recording were 5 minutes long, and those wouldn't fit on a 45, a 45. And so they would cut them down to 2.5 minutes. And so, we would go to the albums to hear the whole friggin' song. But I come from a generation that would put on an album and we'd listen, the whole side one and then flip it over and listen to the whole side two. And we became accustomed to the programming, and a lot of thought by producers went into how do we arrange this album? How do we pace this album? And so the pacing just makes sense to me because I'm so used to hearing that kind of programming growing up.
Right. Whereas for me, it just goes straight from 1 to 6 to 1 to 5 with
Right.
no break in between at all. But I guess what I'm saying is you had the feeling like you were the only person that noticed Songbird, and I think if I listened to this album from start to finish and I had never heard any of these songs before, I also would have skipped over Songbird. It's
Oh,
something that
interesting.
it's something that comes back to me repeatedly, but I mean, I don't know. I can't tell for the past whether or not if I
Yeah.
hadn't heard it alone, but of all Fleetwood Mac songs, like Songbird randomly appears in my head. Like I'll be doing dishes and that's the song I sing.
I don't think when I first heard the album or the first few years that I was listening to the album that Songbird necessarily jumped out at me. It was over time as the album solidified in my head so that when I put it on, I knew every tune when it was coming up. Um, and I think it kind of, I mean, when you look at the songs on this album that got radio play, and Songbird was not one of them. And so I think it stood out because I knew Secondhand News and Dreams and Never Going Back Again, more or less. Don't Stop, Go Your Own Way, The Chain, You Make Love and Fun. I knew all those tunes. And so I guess they kind of become this psychological hum of sort of white noise. And Songbird, the song that I did not always pay attention to, started to, come up above the din. And as I became a better musician and as I learned more about music, I think its craftsmanship really, really jumped out at me at some point. And, it's also not a band tune, all of other Christine's other songs, it's like, well, not Oh Daddy, but the rest of the songs that she got together with Lindsay and they worked out an arrangement, and then they brought John and Mick in, and they created this whole song that was a band song. But Songbird is a Christine McVie solo tune.
Yeah, that was like recorded in an auditorium so it's recorded differently than the rest of the songs on the album as well.
Yeah.
Um I'm trying to like figure it out because you're absolutely correct and like I don't know why it's the standout song for me.
Um,
I don't know specifically like what in the songwriting, and I would have to like go do a little bit more analysis because off the top of my head I can't tell you what it is, but I can
mhm.
tell you that I enjoy listening to Fleetwood Mac songs, but Songbird sticks with me.
Yeah.
Songbird and Landslide as well. I think that because they are like such solo songs that you can like
Mhm.
ingrain them in yourself. It's not like a group effort hearing everybody together.
Yeah.
They're very personal and solo, and so you can like hear them almost on repeat. They're very easy to
Mhm.
repeat internally.
Yeah. I
Um
mean, I think Songbird, it's such a beautiful
ugh,
piece of work. It's a beautiful lyric and it's a perfect arrangement. If you were to add anything to that song, it would cease to be the piece of perfection that it is.
um I hate
And it's
this.
heartfelt.
I hate this line just because I did do a lot of songwriting when I was younger. McVie wrote Songboard in half an hour around midnight, but didn't have anyone around to record it. To ensure she did not forget the chord structure and melody, she remained awake the entire night.
Well, you have to remember there was a lot of coke in the band at the time.
But just like whenever there's like a song that I really really like, I always find out that the person wrote it in like half an hour.
Oh yeah,
I think
sure.
of I watched something for Lin Manuel Miranda.
Hmm.
And there's one song on the Hamilton album that I really like. Wait for it. And he wrote it while on a train. It just came to him. And so he wrote it in the 30 minutes that he was on. And I was like, God damn it again.
I'm trying to think. This story's been repeated from another of artists where they were just sitting in a bar and they wrote it down on a cocktail napkin, and I took it to the studio and went with it. That's I've heard a couple of artists tell that kind of story. So I don't know,
Yeah.
but then you have something like The Chain, which is, pieced together from individual things that each artist wrote at different times.
Right. They come about in
And that
many
ending,
ways, but
the ending, where does that ending come from? It's perfect, but where did it come from? Because it's tenuously linked to the first part.
it feels like a different song.
But does it? I mean, I can say
No.
it does, but it doesn't. Um, they, it's when you think about it as a separate thing, yeah, it's a separate thing, but they make it work as an individual, more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, I think that's what this album kind of is.
Sure.
It's a group that is greater than the sum of all of its parts. Everybody was kind of in their own headspace, but the album was the greater cause, maybe in a
Hmm.
way.
Yeah.
Um, we're over an hour, so I do have to end this.
And Beckett never showed up.
No, she actually texted me. She ended up getting stuck late at work.
Oh, I'm sad.
Yeah. So we'll have to go bother her and ask for her opinions and ask her who her favorite songwriter is and
Yeah, we'll get her and Miguel together, and we'll pin them
see.
down, and we won't let them go until they speak and force them under torture.
Well, thank you for joining me, Tim.
Thank you for having me, Rebecca. Thank you
um,
for letting me blather on.
I was kind of hoping that that's kind of how it would go. I
Be
really
careful what
wanted
you
to
wish
hear
for.
your opinions on it. So, um, but on that note, I'm going to release our new picks tomorrow,
Oh, yay.
and then we will have more discussions at the end of March.
Yay. I'm sorry I did not get the French thing to you. I went looking for that list and I can't find it. I have my American New Wave list, and I have a list of French films, but it wasn't curated the way I curated that French post-war film. But I'll send you what I have.
Yeah, no rush, no rush. I'm
Okay.
not like looking to watch every French New Wave film tomorrow, so
Mm, okay.
we have some
Well, that's
time.
good. That's good. That's good. Then I'm all right.
All right, I'm gonna end the stream. So good night, everybody.